Good morning. My name's Ivan. I'm 32, and like most people working from home, my entire life depends on one small piece of plastic with a cable attached to it. My laptop charger. That morning started like any other, coffee in one hand, the other lazily scrolling through emails. Sunlight crept through my blinds in thin, dusty rays. It should have been a peaceful start to the day, until the dreaded notification flashed on my screen. Battery low, 7% remaining. I froze mid-sip. 7%? How? I muttered, frantically patting the desk, the floor, even checking under a pile of receipts and old snack wrappers. Then it hit me. I left at the office. The office I wasn't planning to visit for at least another week. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall to my right, the wall that separated me from my neighbor, Mykola. I could hear faint music through it, something old-fashioned and cheerful. He was probably in there humming along, wearing those eternally comfortable sweatpants of his. We weren't strangers, but we weren't exactly close friends either. The kind of relationship where you nod in the stairwell, exchange a polite good morning, and maybe borrow sugar once in a blue moon. But desperate times, well, they required desperate neighborly visits. I took a deep breath, gulped down the last of my coffee, and headed for the door. The stairwell smelled faintly of old paint and yesterday's cooking, probably Mykola's. I climbed the 3 steps to his door and pressed the doorbell. A muffled "just a second" came from inside, followed by the sound of slippers shuffling against linoleum. The door swung open, and there he was, Mykola, 50-something, wearing navy sweatpants, a faded t-shirt with Barcelona 2006 on it, and a towel draped across his shoulders like a boxer between rounds. His face lit up the moment he saw me. "Oh, Ivan. What's up? Need sugar again?" I smiled awkwardly. "No, not sugar this time. I was wondering if you might have a laptop charger I could borrow." "Mine's not here." Of course," he said with the kind of enthusiasm people usually reserve for announcing a lottery win. Come in." I hesitated on the doorstep. In my mind, this was going to be a quick exchange. Charger handed over, polite thank you, door closed, problem solved. But before I could even protest, Mykola's hand was on my shoulder, steering me inside like an eager host guiding a VIP guest. His apartment smelled warm, like tea, fresh pastry, and a hint of lemon. The kitchen table was already set, a steaming kettle, a plate of cookies, and, oddly enough, a half-cut lemon sitting right on a napkin like it was waiting for an audience. Mykola bent down to rummage in a cabinet, muttering something about knowing exactly where it is. A moment later, he popped up holding a charger in one hand and gesturing toward a chair with the other. "Here's the charger, but first, sit down. I just baked a pie. You gotta try it while it's still hot." I started to shake my head. "I really should." No. Pie first, work later. That's the rule." I sat down, partly because refusing would have been rude, and partly because Mykola had already placed a plate in front of me with a generous slice of something golden and steaming. It smelled incredible, but I knew better. This wasn't just pie. It was a trap. Once you took the first bite, you were committed. "Go on, try it," Mykola urged, pouring tea into a thick glass mug. "It's apple, but with a little secret ingredient. Guess what it is?" I took a bite. Sweet, tangy, with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Cinnamon? Cloves. He grinned like a magician revealing a trick. "Cardamom. My grandmother swore by it." I nodded, chewing, thinking about my battery percentage steadily plummeting in the other apartment. But before I could steer the conversation back to my urgent need for electricity, Mykola leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to some far-off memory. "You know, this reminds me of when I first met my wife." And just like that, I was trapped in Mykola's personal time machine. He told me about working at a factory in his 20s, about a fishing trip that turned into a night of camping in the rain, about the dance where he met the prettiest girl in the room, who he assured me had terrible taste in music. At some point, he dug out a box of old photographs from the cupboard and started spreading them across the table like a deck of cards. Black and white snapshots, faded Polaroids, glossy prints from the 90s, all with a story attached. I smiled, I laughed in the right places. I sipped my tea, and every now and then my eyes flicked to the charger lying on the counter, just within reach, taunting me. At some point between the story about Mykola's first fishing rod and the one about his neighbor's goat, don't ask, long story, I realized I had completely lost track of time. My tea was cold, the pie was just crumbs, and my laptop, still sitting at home, was probably in the middle of its last digital breath. I cleared my throat. Well, Mykola, this has been really nice. But I should— Oh, wait. One more photo, he interrupted, reaching into the box like a magician pulling the finale out of his hat. This is from my army days. Look at that hair. And there it was, Mykola, 20 years old, with enough thick, dark hair to make a shampoo commercial jealous. I laughed. Impressive. But I really should get back now. He finally nodded, a little reluctantly, and handed me the charger. All right. But remember, you have to return in person. No leaving it by the door like last time with the sugar. Deal, I said, already halfway to the door. The moment I stepped into the stairwell, I felt the rush of freedom. I clutched the charger like a rescued hostage and practically jogged back to my apartment. By the time I plugged it into my laptop, the battery was at 2%. 2. I'd made it just in time. I let out a sigh of relief, opened my emails, and then paused. Somewhere through the wall, I could hear Mykola humming again, probably putting the kettle on for round 2. I smiled despite myself. The day slipped by in a blur of work, deadlines, and the quiet hum of my newly rescued laptop. By evening, I had almost forgotten about my little pipe detour next door until there was a knock at my door. Not the impatient rap of a delivery guy, not the timid tap of someone unsure. This was the steady, confident knock of a man who knew exactly who was on the other side. I opened the door, and there stood Mykola, wearing the same sweatpants, but now with a cheerful smile and a jar of deep red jam in his hand. This, he announced, holding it up like a trophy, is cherry. My wife's recipe. None of that store nonsense. This will change your tea forever. I blinked. Oh, thank you, but— And tomorrow, he continued without pause, I'm making Solianka. You must come. I'll make enough for 3 days. You like pickles, right? Before I could answer, the jar was already in my hands, warm from where he'd been holding it. The smell of sweet cherries seeped through the glass. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mykola, I said, still caught between politeness and the awareness that I'd just been scheduled for another neighborly feast. He gave a satisfied nod and strolled back to his apartment. I stood there for a moment, the jar cradled in my palms, feeling strangely charmed. When I closed the door, I put it on my table next to the charger. 2 objects now tied to this man's growing presence in my life. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. First, I returned the charger in person as promised. I planned to hand it over, exchange a quick thanks again, and leave. But Mykola was waiting by the door like he had a sixth sense. Tea's already brewing, he said, pulling me in before I could form an excuse. And of course there was food, this time honey cake. A couple of days later, I was hurrying past his door on my way back from a store when his voice echoed from above. I looked up to see him leaning over his balcony, waving like we were long-lost relatives. Ivan, come up for a minute. I've got something for you. That minute turned into 2 hours of tea, pickled mushrooms, and a detailed account of his cousin's wedding in 1989. Then came the unannounced visits. One evening, a knock on my door revealed Mykola holding a baking tray. Pierogi turned out perfect, he declared, already stepping inside to cut me a slice. It became a pattern. My doorbell rang. It was Mykola. My phone buzzed. It was Mykola. Sometimes I wondered if the man had secretly installed a tracking device in that charger. And yet, as much as it interrupted my work, my evenings, my solitude, I didn't exactly mind. It was late evening, and I was finally enjoying a rare moment of quiet. No knocks, no balcony shouts, no sudden offers of cake. Just me, my laptop, and the comforting hum of the desk lamp. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mykola. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. Eventually, I sighed and picked up. Hello, Mykola. His voice boomed through the receiver, full of excitement. Ivan, you're not busy tomorrow, right? I knew better than to answer too quickly. Why? Shashlik. I'm making it in the courtyard. Real charcoal, proper marinade. I even bought fresh herbs. You must come. I started to protest. I've got work. Nonsense. You work every day. Tomorrow you eat. Besides, it's no fun grilling alone. And I'll introduce you to my fishing friends. Good guys, you'll like them. I could almost smell the smoke and sizzling meat through the phone. Mykola had that talent. He could make you imagine the food so vividly. You were halfway to his kitchen before you realized you'd agreed. By the time we hung up, I wasn't entirely sure how it happened, but my Saturday plans were now courtyard barbecue with Mykola. I set the phone down, staring out the window into the dark. Somewhere out there, beyond the wall, my neighbor was probably already marinating meat and humming to himself. And though a part of me felt the familiar weight of social exhaustion, another part was oddly looking forward to it. The next afternoon, the courtyard smelled like summer. Smoke curled lazily from a small metal grill, carrying with it the unmistakable aroma of marinated meat sizzling over hot coals. Mykola stood over the grill like a general commanding his troops, flipping skewers with practiced precision. He wore an apron that read King of the Barbecue in bright red letters. "Ivan, you came," he called, grinning as if there had been any doubt. Around him were three other men, all in their 50s or 60s, sitting at a plastic table already covered with salads, bread, and bottles of something that definitely wasn't water. "This is Ivan, my neighbor," Mykola announced proudly, pulling out a chair for me. "The one I told you about. Lives alone, works on a computer all day." The men nodded, each offering a handshake that was both friendly and slightly testing, as if they were weighing me up. Soon Mykola brought over the first batch of shashlik, juicy, smoky, still sizzling. He piled my plate high, ignoring my half-hearted protests. Between bites, his friends told me fishing stories, each one louder and more exaggerated than the last. Mykola kept my glass full, my plate fuller, and any chance of an early escape completely impossible. Somewhere between the third skewer and the second toast to good neighbors, I realized I was actually enjoying myself. The laughter was warm, the food perfect, and Mykola's constant bustling around felt less like an intrusion and more like being swept into a tide you couldn't and didn't want to fight. By the time I made it back to my apartment, the sun had long dipped behind the buildings, leaving the courtyard in a haze of cooling smoke and fading laughter. My clothes smelled like the grill, my stomach was so full it felt like I'd swallowed a bowling ball, and my head carried the faint buzz of Mykola's special, homemade drink. I dropped my keys in a bowl by the door and collapsed into my chair. The laptop was still there, silently waiting for me to open it, but I didn't have the energy or the desire. Instead, I just sat for a while, replaying the afternoon in my head. Mykola's booming laugh, his friends' ridiculous fishing arguments, the way he kept piling food onto my plate like I was in danger of starving at any second. I glanced over at my table. There was the charger that had started all of this, still plugged into the wall. Next to it, the jar of cherry jam. And now, on the counter, a container of leftover shashlik Mykola had insisted I take. It hit me then. What was supposed to be a quick knock on a neighbor's door for a charger had somehow turned into this ongoing, messy, warm thread woven into my days. I leaned back, smiling faintly. Part of me still felt the tug of wanting my quiet, predictable life back. But another part, the louder one, was already wondering what Mykola would come up with next. The next evening was quiet. Too quiet. No knocks. No balcony shouts. No, just a minute of your time that somehow stretched into hours. I made tea, sat at my desk, and waited for the familiar interruption that never came. Out of habit, my eyes wandered to the table. The jar of cherry jam sat there, catching the light from the lamp. Beside it, an empty plate that had once held Mykola's pie. And in the wall socket, the charger, the very one I had never quite gotten around to returning. I picked up my tea and moved to the window. Down in the courtyard, the last traces of daylight clung to the rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, faint music floated on the evening air, something old with a warm, crackling sound, like it came from a radio. I imagined Mykola in his kitchen, maybe humming, maybe baking something new, maybe planning the next reason to knock on my door. And there was that same mixture of feelings I'd had from the start. A little fatigue, a little amusement, and a surprising amount of warmth. The camera, if there had been one, would have slowly pulled back from my window, catching the glow of my apartment against the dark. Inside, the tea, the jam, the charger, the quiet, and the sense that it wouldn't stay quiet for long.